Welcome, Andrea. Lovely to meet you. I was wondering if you could tell me a bit about what you do at Harbour and what's happening at Harbour at the moment.
Sure. So I had business development, partnerships, and sales at Harbor.
Okay.
I was one of the early employees. I actually started out in product management.
Okay.
So I have a really good understanding of both the product and the business side. But I spend my days talking to fund managers, asset managers, telling people why they should tokenize, as well as supporting them through the process.
Great. And so what is happening? What is the state of tokens at the moment? And obviously you guys have got a really good overview doing the work that you do. Could you give us a few clues? I know that regulations and the SEC have sort of been hitting a few companies recently. So
Yeah, well, what's exciting about Harbor is we had some big news this last month. We received our broker-dealer license from FINRA to deal with digital assets, so that was a big thing. And since the beginning, we have been a bit more conservative in our approach about compliance and regulation, and just not stretching the limits and going towards ICOs, for example. And so we were rewarded for that. We also got our transfer agent license, which means we can do a host of things, including support Reg A plus offerings, which is also has a lot of potential, and we're working on additional licensure. We also announced a really big use case, which I think the real estate space has really taken a lot of interest in. I think up until now, I wasn't even the earliest in the space, but even when I began in 2018, the market has been so schizophrenic in how they feel about tokens. Yeah. One day, it's ICOs are dead. The next day, it's everything's going to be tokenized. The following day, people are trying to launch STO exchanges, but there aren't enough tokenized assets to even offer on those exchanges. And so what we've seen is, what I'm excited about is that the hype is dying down. So I think back in 2017, if you just yelled the word token, people thought that money would rain from the sky. Yeah. Those days are over, which is exciting because now people are shifting their emphasis on what does tokenization actually bring. Yes. And so people are asking hard questions like, how is this different than a database? Why can't I just use existing software? And I think the use cases that we're working on really are proving that automated compliance is important and saves costs. Settlement times are much quicker online. And the third is really that liquidity is necessary. Mm-hmm. So the use cases that we're working on, again, is just proving out that there's real use cases for liquidity besides speculative trading.
And I see now that there's IEOs.
Yes.
Do you guys look at those or deal with those at all?
So IEO stands for Initial Exchange Offerings, and so those are tied more to exchanges. Okay. I think Binance has been the one that has done a lot around that. There's less regulation in the country that Binance is at. Yes. And so I think that's actually been dying down a bit too.
Oh, interesting. Another fad, basically.
Yeah. What's next,
the
right?
The nature of the beast, really, isn't it? And so what's your personal vision of where we're heading? I mean, you've had this great experience of a few years in the industry. What's your vision and where do you hope that we'll end up?
So my background is I came from early stage venture capital, and I had the opportunity to be able to sit at one of the top performing funds. And I saw kind of return dynamics, and I saw how there's a few problems with the venture asset class. It's very illiquid. You're locked in for 7 to 10 years. Yeah. You're lucky someone's going to IPO in 5 years, right? Yeah. The second thing is good venture funds that actually make their returns get filled up quickly by existing LPs. It takes decades to build those relationships to get into those investments. And so these assets are the highest performing in the last probably decade, yet it's not accessible to the average investor. And then the third thing was when I came back, I was actually abroad and I came back to the US, I saw that people were just not open to a lot of deals outside the US. And again, it was just not accessible to other countries. And so I joined Harbor initially because I thought, wow, this technology is going to democratize access to investments, bring some of the best investments in a format where more people can realize more returns. and it can be global, right? And so I think that vision is the guiding vision for most of us. We still believe that where we are with technology, millennials don't trust banks. Like in general, there's just going to be an entire overhaul of the financial system.
I agree.
And so what does that mean? And so I think I still believe that everything is going to become tokenized. It's just when and how long is that going to take? And I think that's what we've all underestimated. But what I do think this technology enables is all kinds of unbundling and rebundling of unique assets. Now we're talking about tokenizing athletes. I've talked to movie studios. I've talked to artists. I think that we're just at the beginning, but hopefully a world where we have a lot of new types of financial instruments that people can understand and participate in.
And I know last year when I was talking to a lot of VCs, a few of them were saying that they were actually changing the structure of their firm so that they could receive tokens. Yeah. So they were the early adopters, I would say. Obviously, that's quietened down now, but I'm sure ultimately a lot of VCs will get in on it as well. So
I do think it's broader than. I mean, I can launch into a whole nother thing, but do I have more time or?
Sure, a few minutes.
I was just going to say, I think right now you're going to see a lot more tokenized debt and bonds, potentially private equity, but I feel like company equity is still a little bit tricky.
Okay.
Specifically VCs and companies, because in those two asset types, who your investor is still matters. Okay. And so when it's easier for a company to just plop down and get investment from two really high profile VCs, that's still much easier for them than going out there to kind of raise from a large number of investors, have to deal with all the financial statements and whatnot. And so there still is some bit of an adverse selection as to who ends up deciding to tokenize.
Okay.
In specifically the company equity and VC world. So
great. Well, thanks so much, Andrea. I think this is going to be a great panel. I know we've lost a couple of people who couldn't make it, but I'm sure it will be fabulous. I'm really interested to hear what everyone says about the updates at the moment. So thanks for coming.
Thank you.